Now we're going to take a look at standard form of a quadratic function. And so standard form is going to be in the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now these numbers aren't as intuitively meaningful as the numbers or the constants in the vertex form of a quadratic, but in standard form we can also tell a lot of information, and this is the way you're usually going to see a quadratic. So if we take a look at one of these, we're going to want to look at what is the x-intercepts, the y-intercepts, the vertex, and eventually be able to graph a function given this form. So for an example today, we're going to take a look at this function here. We've got f of x equals negative 2x squared minus 4x plus 6. The first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is the easiest one for a standard form equation, and that is to find the y-intercept. Now if you remember, the y-intercept we find by plugging in 0 for x. Now if I plug in 0 for x, it's pretty clear that these two terms are going to go away, and the only term left is going to be this c value at the end. So in this equation, the y-intercept, again, if we plug in 0 for x, they're going away, the y-intercept is 6. And that's, of course, the coordinate is 0, 6. That one's pretty easy. That's the nice one in standard form. Finding the other ones is going to be a little bit trickier. Next, let's go ahead and look at the vertex. Now, the vertex of a quadratic, we've got the formula negative b over 2a. And that's going to find the x-coordinates of our vertex. And to find the y-coordinate, we're going to plug that back into the function. Now, I picked a nice one here. This one has a very easy to find vertex, but a lot of times that could end up being a fraction. So if we're going to do that on this one, negative b is actually going to be a positive 4 over 2a, which is going to be a negative 4. And so we end up with our x-coordinate of our vertex being 4 divided by negative 4, which is just negative 1. So for our vertex so far, we've got negative 1 for our x-coordinate. To find our y-coordinate, we're going to take the x-coordinate and just use the function rule to figure out what the y-coordinate is going to be. And so we'll have negative 2 times negative 1 squared minus 4 times negative 1 plus 6. And we'll just go through and simplify that. So negative 1 squared is 1, times negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 4 times negative 1 is a positive 4, and plus 6, and we'll get 8 from that. So our vertex is going to be at the point negative 1, 8. So in standard form, the y-intercept is very easy to find, and if you know this formula, which we'll take a look at again in a little bit, it's very, very easy to find the vertex as well. Now let's take a look at finding the x-intercepts. So to find the x-intercepts of any function, we're going to be plugging in 0 for the y-coordinate and solving that equation. Now these equations here are quadratic equations. A quadratic function is going to have a quadratic equation to find its zeros. We've got lots of options. We can factor. This function, this equation factors very easily. We could also complete the square, or we could use the quadratic formula. We're going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula today. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And one thing I just want to point out real quick here, and I'll mention this again, is if you look at this part of the quadratic formula, that's where your vertex is coming from. So we'll come back to that once we have this simplified a little bit further. So we're going to go ahead and plug in our coordinates, our constants here, a, b, and c, and find the x-intercepts. So negative b is going to be a positive 4, plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 4, squared, minus 4, a is negative 2, and c is 6. And that whole thing is going to be divided by 2 times the a value, which is negative 2. Now we just have to go through and we have to simplify until we find our solutions. So we'll start with the exponents. Negative 4 squared is 16. Over here we've got negative 4 times negative 2 times positive 6, which is going to be a positive 48 all over negative 4. We'll go ahead and add these in the middle, which is going to give us 64. And since we know the square root of 64 is 8, we will have 4 plus or minus 8 over negative 4. And we'll simplify this up a little bit. Before I simplify it the whole way, though, I want to point out here that we could simplify this fraction a little bit. 4 over 4 is negative 1, and then we'd have minus or plus 2. That negative 1, that negative 1 is the x-coordinate of our vertex. If you look there, that's the x-coordinate of our vertex. And then the plus or minus is going to tell us how far to the left and how far to the right our coordinates are. So if we have negative 1 minus 2, that's negative 3. And if we have negative 1 plus 2, that's positive 1. And so those are our x-intercepts. Now, of course, as I mentioned, this function and this equation can be solved by factoring, and it can be solved by completing the square. In general, if you can factor it, I would suggest that you factor it. I just wanted to show you guys the quadratic formula and the fact that we have the x-coordinate of our vertex right there. So let's go ahead and graph that really quick. We're going to start with the vertex, which we decided was negative 1, 8. And so on a graph, we have negative 1, 8, which would go up here. We said our y-intercept